Okay, so welcome everyone. So today we'll be talking about the web accessibility. So this workshop is hosted by the ETS. So my name is Marika, and I'm the educational technologist with ETS. And joining me today is my lovely colleague, Gabrielle. So if you would like to introduce yourself, Gabrielle.
Hello, for those who don't know me, I'm Gabrielle Coombs. I'm a learning designer with ETS.
Thank you, Gabby. So we will start off with the land acknowledgement. So this event is being hosted on the traditional and ceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And we would also like to extend our invitation to everyone to acknowledge the land upon which you are joining us today in the chat. And if you would like to know more about First Nations and Indigenous territories where we're living on, please visit native-land.ca. So this is the agenda for today. So we will first talk about why is accessible content important, and then we will also talk about the web content accessibility guidelines, and then we will put them into actions by having some practices and quiz that we can work together. Okay, so Gabrielle will first talk about why web content accessibility is important.
Hey, thank you, Marika. So obviously in the work that all of us do, we want to try and reach as many people as possible, especially if you're working with communicating within the faculty or with students. So it is really important that those communications reach everyone. UBC is a very diverse community, and the people who work here bring so much value to the work that we do, but everyone has varying needs. So when we are creating content for online, it's really important to keep in mind that this is our diverse community here at UBC and that we want to make sure that everyone feels included, but more than just being included, that they're actually able to access and use the contents that you've been working so hard on. On top of that, and I would hope that it goes without saying, but really good accessibility practices do benefit everyone, not just people with disabilities, but for example, somebody who might not have English as their first language, somebody who maybe doesn't have great internet, someone who gets stuck in traffic. It's really helpful to have good accessible practice from the beginning, because it means that everyone's life, generally speaking, will be a lot easier, not just people with disabilities, even though that's who we are centering in our practice. So what I would like to do is share a quick questionnaire with you all, and Marika, if you could move to the next slide. Before we go in and let everyone know some of our tips and tricks, we would love to hear from you. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and Marika, you can bring up the link to our Mentimeter. I can send it, I think I've sent it to you in our chat on Mattermost. And the idea here is that we are looking for what can you do, or what do you already do to make contents accessible.
Just a second.
I can send it to you in the chat as well, Marika.
Yes, sure.
You got it? Perfect.
Yes.
So this is a live poll. You can add some or a few words. You could add a sentence, but just things that you know that you can do to make web contents more accessible already. And once we give everyone a few minutes to do that, we'll go through some of these answers. And I can already see we've got some beautiful answers here. Alt text, yes. Header hierarchies, alt text, fantastic. So again, if you would like to add to this, you are more than welcome to do so by clicking on the link in the chat. Okay, so there are two things here that I can see mentioned. We've got alt text, which is great, and we will be talking about alt text quite a lot today, and header hierarchies. That's something we'll be talking about as well. So Marika, if you can head back to our slides. Let's see if we can keep going. So thinking about those things as well as a few others, we will dive into our topics for today. So before we look at the nitty-gritty, we would like to go over the web content accessibility guidelines, not in full, because of course there are a lot of pieces of information that WCAG, WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines go through. But we really wanted to focus on their sort of guiding acronym, the POUR acronym. So we're looking at POUR, and Marika, if you could bring up the first one. So P stands for perceivable. Can all users perceive the information? So think about, for example, if you're using WordPress and you use a video, will everyone who accesses that WordPress page be able to garner the same information from that video, irrespective of their abilities or whether or not they have a disability or not? The next one, O, stands for operable. Can all users operate the page? So we're thinking about, are links working? Are they able to navigate through the page efficiently and effectively in order to get what they need? The next one, U, is for understandable. Can all users understand where contents are and what to do with them? So if I have instructions on a web page, are those instructions clear? Do they lead to a logical next step? Would somebody who is using a screen reader, for example, also be able to understand those instructions? Things like that. And our final one, R, is for robust. So can these contents be used on or across different platforms? So say, for example, you're putting information onto a web page in WordPress. Would I be able to use that same information in a different platform, say, for example, on Canvas or in an email? So these 4 principles, these guidelines, are things to think about when you are editing content online. And then we're going to move over to the nitty-gritty, which I will let Marika go into in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and so based on the guidelines, we have some web accessibility basics that we can apply these guidelines on. So the first one is, so we will actually go through them in more details in the later slides. So we will go through descriptive links, which is the phrase that has the HTML link embedded. And then we'll talk about alt text, which a few of you already know what it is. So it is the description alternative for an image. And then we'll also talk about the content structure, which you basically just tag phrase or the paragraph based on its context, and so you can give it headings to make that more accessible to readers. And then we'll also go through how to make colors more accessible on a document, website, or page. And then we will also talk about videos that we can turn on captions and transcripts to make it more accessible. And then we'll also talk about how to create more accessible tables and documents as well.
I might start sharing my screen if that's okay, Marika.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with descriptive links. So when we're talking about a descriptive link, what we're really talking about, and if this presentation is going to be functional for me, which, never know. Whoop, come on. So while this is loading for me, when we're talking about descriptive links, the idea is that we're not just posting a URL as you would normally get at the top of your browser screen. We want to make sure that that description for the link is there so that people who are following the link are able to see it. And Marika, just because my internet is looking a little slow, I might get you to share again just for consistency's sake. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, so a plain URL, as I was saying, the one that you would put into your browser is not going to be screen reader friendly. We do have some examples later on for some of our other items of how it might sound, but when you read a URL using a screen reader, it will read every item individually. So once it gets to a URL on the page, it will start with HTTPS:/ / and so on, and read out the entire URL in that fashion, which is really, really time consuming, not very efficient. And also it doesn't really tell people what the URL is going to take them to. So if we go to our next point, Marika, the idea is that we want to embed that link into a descriptive phrase to make it more accessible. So rather than putting the link on its own on the page, embedding it into a description of what that web page is going to be. So Marika, if you could, yeah. So the idea here is that when you're linking to a web page, we want to avoid using ambiguous phrases like click here or read me. This is really, really common on web pages across the internet. I see it constantly. It's used a lot in like journalistic articles and on other websites, but it is, again, it's not very clear what that click me or click here is taking you to. So making sure that the phrase that is describing the URL is really clear. And then our final point, if you are going to be linking out to a document, say, for example, a Word document or PDF, really try to include that file extension at the end in square parentheses. So let's go through a few examples. So the first one we have here, for more information on the topic, click here. This would be inaccessible. We don't know what the topic is. We don't know where here is. The click here will take me somewhere, but where I don't know. So not very accessible and not really very useful. The next option we have is much more accessible. So here we have visit the Canvas Community Forum guide on how to add events to the calendar to learn more. And we can see that the link is on exactly where it's taking you. It's taking you to Canvas Community Forum guide, and then what the guide is on, how to add events to the calendar. So it's been embedded in the middle of the sentence in a phrase that describes exactly where that link is going to take you. Finally, you can see here, fill in the form, request for extended access, and then in square parentheses, we have PDF. So for me, as a user who either using a screen reader or even just as somebody browsing the web, I know that this is going to take me to a file rather than a web page. So again, having that clarity in your links is really, really crucial to ensure best usability for everyone. So let's do a quick quiz. We're going to use a Zoom poll to get an idea of which of the following links is going to be accessible, and I can launch that one.
Okay.
So let's click launch. So we have 5 options. I've launched the quiz. You should be able to see it. And our options are A, follow the following link to our workshops. B, we have the full link. C, for more information, visit the ETS website workshops and events page. Or D, click here for more information. You can see 2 people have already answered. This is really great. And we'll give everyone just a couple more moments to answer the question. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. And our correct answer is C. So I think almost everyone got it right. The problem with B is that it is just the link without any description. Yes, I know where that link is going to take me because I'm the slug, the piece that says workshop events. I can kind of get an idea of where it's going to take me. But again, remember, if somebody using a screen reader is going to hear the whole thing, including the HTTPS, including all of the dots, including all of the slashes. So a little not the best, if possible, to use something like that. C is much more accessible. It really describes the problem. Okay, so let's move to the next.
Okay, so now we'll move on to alt text. So images can be a great way to keep people engaged and also help communicate complex ideas. So image descriptions, also known as alt text, provide a text-based description alternative to an image. So why it is important to have an alt text on image? So users with visual impairments will have difficulty perceiving the message from the image if there are no image descriptions to explain the content of the image. So alt text is actually crucial for them because screen readers can't read images. And in some cases, an image won't show up or can't be downloaded when the user is with a poor network connection. So then the alt text can still convey the message to them if it's available. And apart from improving user experience and accessibility, adding image alt text can also ensure the images are optimized for search engines. So here are some of the best practices for writing a good alt text. So describe the image based on the page context, so convey the full meaning of the image. For example, an image of the Eiffel Tower will have a different description on a page for architecture in comparison to a page for the history of France. And the second point is to be concise. It is advisable to keep the alt text at around 125 characters or less, because most of the popular screen readers will actually cut off alt text after around 125 characters. And if you have a complex image like infographics or charts, write a separate caption for the image instead. And if you have avoid saying image of or picture of because it's already assumed that your alt text is referring to an image. So there's no need to repeat this information. And also the screen reader will actually add those phrases automatically. For images that don't represent any relevant content and are only for decorative purposes, identify them as decorative in the alt text. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. So for this bicycle image here, so a bad alt text would be the file name of this image. So bicycle.png doesn't tell you much about this image. So could anyone just put in the chat maybe what you think might be a good alt text for this image?
You also could, if you would prefer, raise your hand or just talk to us as well. You're welcome to use the chat or to just start talking if you'd like. So an example of what would be better. Oh, awesome. We have quite a few. So I know Abby has said blue bike leaning on brick wall. Amanda, blue bicycle leaning against brick wall, blue bicycle leaning against a brick wall, lots of blue bicycles leaning against a brick wall.
Yes, that's really good. So here's the example of a good description. So it's very similar to what you guys have mentioned in the chat. So a good alt text will actually allow you to picture the image in your head without seeing it. So you guys did provide a good alt text, so you know that it's a blue bike and there's a brick wall. So it gives you much more context. So these are very useful alt text for this image. So let's look at another example. So, and this is the an example of an image of a painting. So as mentioned before, that an image actually can have different alt text for different contexts to make it more relevant. So for example, if this image is shown in a history class, the alt text can focus more on what historical event that it is related to. And on the other hand, if this is included in an art class, it would be nice to mention who the artist is, as well as the way that it is painted. Okay, so let's pull up another poll. So Gabrielle, if you can pull up the poll for me. So for this image, which of the following is the best alt text for this image? So there are three options, A, B, and C.
Okay, so I can see a lot of people have already answered.
Yes, great.
And I can see that most of it is perfect. So I'm
Yes.
going to end the poll and share the results.
Yes, so I think everyone got it right. So the correct one is option B. So it gives you an idea what it's on the image, as it describes the shape and color of Tower Pisa. And for option A, it is very concise, but it is actually too short to give the user much context if that person has never seen or doesn't know what Tower Pisa looks like. And on the other hand, option C is actually too descriptive and provides too much context, and that could be irrelevant to the message that this image is trying to convey. So it is also advised to keep the alt text 125 characters or less. So for long descriptions, it could be included on the page content or as captions instead. Okay, so now we'll go to the content structure.
Yeah. And if you could move that.
I can't. Let's see. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about content structure. So as quite a few people mentioned in that Mentimeter poll that we did earlier, using content structured conventions are really important, primarily, again, so it is accessible for screen readers. On top of that, well-structured content just facilitates reading for everyone. So making sure that your content is organized and clear goes a long way, not just for people with disabilities, but for generally for most people, whether they're students, faculty, or otherwise. So most text editors will have set styling for including things like headings with particular levels. So whether you can see heading 1, heading 2, and paragraphs to format your content. These are really helpful, again, for people using a screen reader to differentiate between what the text is trying to do on a page. If you've ever used a screen reader before, if something isn't labeled as a heading, it will just be assumed to be a paragraph, and then it will flow directly into the next paragraph. So if your heading is red and your next paragraph starts with red is, it'll say red is blah, 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 blah. And so it will really miss out on that distinguishing feature of that title. We won't know that the topic of the paragraph is going to be about the color red. So on top of that, obviously, we're trying to use the text editor to add that styling. A lot of people often will add styling in the form of font changes, whether they make something bold, italicize it, change the type of font, change the size to indicate that something is a heading. And while visually this does help, it will do nothing for a screen reader, unfortunately. So when you're using these preset styles, ensure that you're using them correctly. And then on top of that, if you'd like to add other styling features to it, you can, but just make sure that those structures are in place first. So if we move to the next slide, we have an example here. So again, we're really looking to make sure that we're using those ordered heading and paragraph options. For the levels of your headings, they cannot be skipped. So if you're starting with heading 1, if you have a subheading, make sure that it is the next level down from the previous heading. And so in our example here, we have a page about colors. Our main topic is colors, so that's going to be heading 1. The subheading below that, primary colors, is the next level down, so that should be heading 2. Within primary colors, I have another subheading, subtractive model, so that would be heading 3. And then another subheading below that is red. And then if we look below that, that is where we will start with paragraph. So if you're using, for example, WordPress, you will have this available in your toolbar, and you can highlight your heading and then just adjust it in the toolbar by choosing heading 1, much in the same way you can do this in Word. It is an option. It will often be called styles. So just make sure that you're looking for those pieces and being cautious about not skipping heading levels as well. So we'll do a quick quiz. We have another page about online learning. And Marika, I think that your Zoom controls at the bottom might need to be moved up or down just so that we can see the entire example. Perfect. So again, I'm going to launch this poll. And we want to see which one is incorrectly labeled. So we have A is heading 1, B is heading 2, C is heading 2, D is heading 4, E is heading 3. So I'll give everyone a bit of time to answer this. Look at the different headings, think about, are we skipping any levels? Is everything clearly labeled? Okay, it's looking good. I'll give everyone a couple more moments just to have a look and think about it. We'll end the poll in a moment. Okay, great. And let's share the results. So everyone got it correct. We're looking at heading 4, which is incorrect. Is there a reason why? Is anyone feeling confident that they want to share their reasoning for why this would be incorrectly labeled? Okay, it should be heading 3. Great. What's the problem? Perfect. Yeah, we're missing that hierarchy. It's skipped. We skipped a heading level. So yes, as Amanda said, it should absolutely be heading 3. We can't go from heading 2 to heading 4. But otherwise, it's looking pretty good. Everything is labeled correctly except for D. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, so we'll talk about using colors. So colors are often used for emphasizing or styling to attract or engage users. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines specify a way to calculate the color contrast between text color and background color. And the guidelines also designate ratings on the color contrast from failing to AAA. And text with poor contrast can be difficult to read for everyone, but especially for people with visual impairments such as color blindness. And there are many color contrast checking tools available online, such as contrastchecker.com, as you can't check the exact ratio or contrast rating by just looking at the colors. Apart from ensuring high contrast between text and its background, you may also consider using grayscale, which eliminates color combination that is hard to distinguish. So people with visual impairments such as color blindness can view the image or text more easily. Using a lot of colors may be visually overwhelming for readers because it may add unnecessary cognitive load. So use colors sparingly and mindfully to avoid detracting from the content. Another thing to avoid is to use colors to convey meaning or information on diagrams, maps, charts, or other forms of graphics. Try using different forms, shapes, or patterns to make the difference more noticeable or easy to distinguish. Okay, so now let's take a look at some examples. So we start with a bad example here of color combination. So it is bad because of the choice of color, which is pink and green. So people with red-green color blindness could have difficulty reading it. And the contrast ratio between the two colors is actually not up to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines standard. So when we use grayscale for these two colors, it improves the accessibility by removing the colors that are difficult to distinguish for people with color blindness, but the contrast is still quite low. So here is what a good example of color combination that is accessible to reader. So it has a high contrast and it is not a common color combination that is difficult for people with color blindness to read. And here is also an example how we use patterns to help people to distinguish. So we are not just relying on color itself, but also using patterns. Okay, so let's have another quiz. So we will have another polls. So which of the following color combinations is inaccessible? So we have A for combo A, B for combo B, C for combo C, and D for combo A and C, and E for all of the above. So the question is, which combination is inaccessible? So not as easy to read. Okay, I think we have everyone answered. So, okay, let's see. Okay, so the correct answer is D, combo A and C. So the color combination is actually, so the color contrast for A is actually not high enough. And then for C, it's the same, but because it's a dark background, so maybe the color actually pops up more. But if you put those, so you can actually check the contrast by putting the hex code of the font and the background color into those checker, and then you can actually then get exact ratio for the color combination. So for actually combo A and C, those two are with lower ratio. So the only one that is accessible is actually combo B. So something that may looks like enough contrast to you with naked eyes actually may not be the case when you check it with the contrast checker. So please do make sure if you're unsure, just to check it with the online tool to make sure that the color combinations is accessible. Okay.
Just quickly before we move on as well, you may notice with combo A that we have that sort of blue-orange combination, which can actually be a slightly dangerous one, especially if people, it can induce seizures, having those really, really sort of difficult to read combinations. So be really cautious when you're using color, not only about looking at whether the contrast is accessible, but whether that combination could potentially be dangerous for some people as well.
Okay, so the next section.
Okay, so captions and transcripts, they're really, as Marika was saying, like with video, with images, media, broadly speaking, is a really good way to engage people. However, it can be completely inaccessible if you are not providing any text alternatives. So for example, when you're using video, it's important to include captions and where possible, a transcript. This will really help people who have a hearing impairment, for whom a text alternative is imperative that they need, but also for somebody who might be accessing a web page from a remote area. Not everyone has great internet. It's something I think especially for myself living in the lower mainland, I definitely take for granted, but folks in remote areas often don't have consistent internet connection. So having that transcript is actually really beneficial for people who might not even have the ability to stream a video. Having the transcript means that they're able to garner the same information without having to play that video. Same goes for audio. If you are including a podcast episode or just an audio clip on a page, making sure that that transcript is available for people, whether it is because they have a hearing impairment or, again, if they have poor internet connection. Of course, you know, we're centering people with disabilities when we're talking about this, but captions and transcripts go a really long way for not only people with disability, but people who might be learning English with the limited internet connection. And I know for myself, anecdotally, I love captions. I use captions when I watch Netflix. I use captions when I'm at work and I'm using video. I use captions on Zoom. I personally find having text alternatives really helpful for when audio is maybe inconsistent, if the volume is inconsistent, or maybe if I'm listening to something where I miss a word, having that caption or that transcript is really, really helpful. So definitely something to consider doing if it's not already part of your practice. So if we move to the next slide, We are very lucky at UBC to have some options for us already that can really empower us to add captions and transcripts. At the bottom of my list, I've put YouTube just because I think everyone often will use YouTube videos, which is great. And YouTube does have auto captioning, which is a great feature. It can be very inconsistent, but it is available. So just something to keep in mind if you're sharing videos, YouTube does have auto captioning. However, for us at UBC, we do have access to a tool called Kaltura, which is a video hosting platform at UBC that you can use to upload video and share it. And the nice thing about Kaltura is that you can order machine-generated captions. In my experience, they're relatively accurate. There may be a few errors throughout your captions, but it tends to have a quite fast turnaround. It takes about 30 minutes-ish, depending on the length of the video, for those machine-generated captions to be provided. And then on top of that, once they have generated the captions, you have the ability to edit them. And then you can also view them as a transcript, which you can then add to web pages. So I might quickly share my screen with you. If that's okay, Marika, I'll just quickly show that page.
Yes.
And on our website, and I will put the link in the chat, we do have instructions on how to use captions in Kaltura. The website for Kaltura is learning.video.ubc.ca, and it is a CWL login site. So anyone who is working at UBC will be able to access Kaltura. And then once you're in there, we have lots of instructions on how to order captions, how to view your captions, how to edit captions, and then view the transcript. So once you've got your captions, actually at the bottom of your video, you'll be able to see the transcript below, and then you can copy and paste that onto your site as an option, or you could put it into a Word document for people to download. So one of the nice things about having access to Kaltura is the ability to add captions really easily without too much effort, and it makes an incredible difference to people. So I would highly recommend you getting used to or comfortable with Kaltura as a tool. Of course, ETS is here to support you if you're unfamiliar with it. We can go through some of the common issues that you might encounter and just general usability of the tool and for you to get more comfortable adding captions to videos. All right, Marika, you can start sharing again.
Yes. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Oops. Okay, so we'll now move on to using tables. So I think majority of you haven't tried using a screen reader before. So I think it might be interesting for you to know what a screen reader will read when they interpret a table. So let's hope this works.
Table with 5 columns and 4 rows. Subject, session, days, time, mode of delivery. East 335, Mon, Wed, 1330 1500 hours, in person, LLED 33430, Wed, 10 o'clock 11 o'clock, in person, Kin 427002, Tuesday, 10:30 12 o'clock, online.
Okay, so for kin class, which day is it offered? Can anyone remember, or can anyone catch that information? Okay, so the table is actually this table that it is interpreting. Table is a good way to interpret to organize data. So when you're creating a table, here are some tips to create an accessible table. So first of all, you'll have to include a header. So simple data tables can easily be read by screen reader, as we have just heard, if they have the appropriate tag and attribute to identify which cells are the row and column headers. And remember to avoid merge cells, split cells, or blank cells, because screen readers actually read the tables linearly. So you will hear the header row first and then the second row. So if you have merge cells, split cells, or blank cells, they will make it very difficult, if not impossible, for a screen reader to read the information in the table in a way that makes sense to the user. And as you have just heard, what a screen reader will have to go through on a simple structured table that we just heard just now. Avoid complex structure like nesting a table within a table, as that would make the reader very difficult or difficult to understand the context. And also try to keep it short, because having too many rows and columns could be quite confusing to the user. And then it can be very time consuming to read a table with the screen reader. So use alt text or add a short summary or caption of the information provided in the table, so that screen reader users can actually decide if they want to read the entire table. And last but not least, do not use screenshots of tables. So build a table in your document, email, or website rather than just including a screenshot, because a screen reader can read an image, as mentioned before. So a person using a screen reader won't know what the data is contained in a screenshot of the table. Okay, so as tables are also commonly used for page layout before, to overcome limitations in visual presentation and layout using HTML when building website. But now with CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet, there is actually much more flexibility in controlling the page layout. So it is best not to use tables for design layout. So here is an example that actually uses a table for page layout. So for visual users, it will actually read basement toilets must flush up. But since this is actually made of a table with 4 columns and 3 rows, and since the screen reader reads the table linearly, so this is what actually the screen reader will be reading.
Basement up, toilets flush must.
Okay, so as you heard, it will actually make no sense to people with visual impairment who relies on screen reader, because the sequence of the words is not what the message should be. So it is not recommended to use a table for layout structure.
And also just quickly to note, it completely skipped the image, which is, you know, an issue as well.
Right. Okay, so this is probably our final poll for today. So Gabrielle, please pull that out. And so the question would be, what makes this table inaccessible? So option A is merge cells, B, blank cells, C, split cells, D, all of the above, and E, none of the above.
Okay, I think we have a couple more answers to put in, but we will close the poll in a moment. Okay, let's end the poll now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So for those who answered the poll, yes, you all got it right. So all of the above. So merge cells, blank cells, split cells. As mentioned before, these cells will make the screen reader difficult to read because it is reading linearly. So if it's not organized in that way, it will make no sense to the user on how to interpret this table. So please avoid using them within the table. Okay, so we will move on to accessible documents.
Okay, so finally, we wanted to talk about creating actual documents that you might be uploading to the web or just creating for your own internal use. So when you're sharing documents with others, keep in mind that some formats are going to be more accessible than others. The big problem that we often come across, especially when we're looking at online contents, is with scanned documents that have been converted into PDFs. They are completely unusable for people using a screen reader, especially if they haven't gone through the OCR process, which is the optical character recognition process that can be done with PDFs, which will go through a file, try to recognize the characters and then make it readable for a screen reader. Oftentimes that doesn't really happen with scanned documents. The picture or the scanned file or scanned page will be just read as an image and created into a PDF. And on top of that, often scanned documents just have poor readability. I know from my personal experience, often the text might be blurry. The text might also be slightly slanted. It might be really difficult to read anyway, but it would be unusable to somebody with a screen reader. The next point too is that PDFs, generally speaking, can be quite inaccessible if they haven't been set up accessibly to begin with. And if they haven't, it is quite difficult to make a PDF accessible. It's not impossible, but it is very time consuming. It involves tagging each element within the PDF, going through and ensuring that the reading order is logical, adding alt text to images, and just generally making sure that if you're using a screen reader, that it will flow properly. And this can be really difficult when, you might not be able to move elements on a PDF. You might not be able to select elements on a PDF to be tagged. So PDFs present some issues. So in order to sort of circumvent that problem, we recommend making your file using a Word document first, following all of the tips that we've gone through. So adding alt text to your images, ensuring that you're using correct heading hierarchy and heading styling within your document, and then going through an accessibility check in Word, and then saving it as a PDF. Obviously, PDFs are really useful for a lot of reasons, especially if you want something that other people can't edit. So making sure that it's accessible at the beginning by making it in Word and then converting it to a PDF is actually quite an easy way to make an accessible PDF. But otherwise, using Word should be totally fine. So just things to keep in mind: optical character recognition for scanned documents, checking to see if your PDF is accessible or not. If you have access to Adobe like Acrobat Reader, you should be able to perform an accessibility check, but you may not be able to edit the accessibility or tag the document unless you have the full paid version, which if you are a staff member at UBC, you should have access to. But all else failing, Word documents are a good alternative. Okay, and so to quickly recap, obviously, using good accessibility practices benefits everyone. The tips and tricks that we've shared today are not the complete and utter, guide to making accessible items online, but it is a really good starting point. If you are interested in learning more about web accessibility, particularly the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and how those can be implemented in your own practice, of course, get in touch with ETS. We're always available if you have any questions that you have on web accessibility. And I know personally, I love talking about it, so I will be more than happy to field any questions from anyone. And I know Marika is very, very knowledgeable about web accessibility as well. So we would love to be in touch with you if you have any more questions. But of course, we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions while you're here. So please, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to pop them in the chat. You can raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom, or you can jump right in and unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, so I can't see any questions. Marika, I don't know if you can see any on your end. No. I don't think so. I can't see any in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I suppose we might wrap up. We'll hang around until 12:30, just in case anyone would like to ask questions with fewer people in the room. But if not, please do connect with us. You can follow us on Twitter at UBC_ETS. You can subscribe to our mailing list or book a one-on-one consultation with us. So whatever it is that works for you, please do connect if you have any questions. You're also more than welcome to visit our website, which has lots of great guides on particular web accessibility issues, like we were talking about culture and captioning earlier. All of that information is available on the website. And finally, a big thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle and Marika. That was really, really helpful, and some great new tips, things that I hadn't been aware of. So I really appreciate the session, and just how interesting and interactive you made it for us. So thanks so much.
It's our pleasure. Thank you all for coming.
Yes.